He is an author of books such as Insane Clown, President, Griftopia, The Divide and Hate, Inc. He is also the editor at Racket News on Substack, where he also writes. Coming back to the show, making his sophomore appearance on the DueDissidence podcast, Matt Taibbi. Matt, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Keaton. How's it going? How's it going, Russell?
Good. How are you, Matt?
Good.
Good, and that will double as our second sound check, because I know you switched mics during the countdown. So beautiful. We can hear you loud and clear. Good. Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks so much for being here. It's great to see you again. A lot has happened since you were last here. When you were last here, you were here to talk about the Twitter files, and your life has only gotten more interesting since then. Who'd have thought that the Twitter files would not be the peak? It would actually get crazier for you since then.
Yeah, it's been a weird year. This is exactly a year and a day since the first Twitter files, and
wow,
and it's been pretty strange and very frustrating, gentlemen. I'll have to tell you. I mean, for the most part in my life, I haven't taken this job personally, but the last year of watching like the sort of traditional ACLU liberal crowd completely blow off this story has been kind of maddening. It's gotten to me personally in a way that like nothing I've ever done before has, and I don't know, maybe you can explain it to me. It's been I don't know. So hope we can talk about that a little bit, because that's part of the backstory to this week too. So
absolutely.
That's definitely in our wheelhouse, Matt.
Yeah. It's certainly in our wheelhouse. And, when we were setting up this interview, you mentioned how, you anticipated a very unpleasant time down in Washington, D.C. when you testified for the House. And we watched
hang on, Kate, before we get into that, Matt, what kind of music did you like in high school?
Everything. I listened to a lot of rap and hip hop because I grew up playing a lot of street basketball, and that was kind of where I started. But I listened to everything, But now that I'm playing drums, I play a lot of like stuff like Nirvana and Led Zeppelin. Believe it or not, I mean it's a little embarrassing, but
you listen to any Maiden?
Iron Maiden. Oh yeah, how did you know that?
Well, we have a certain tradition here, and we hit 666. So take out your headbanging skills, man.
That's when we hit 666 in the chat. Beautiful.
That's excellent. Yeah. No, I was actually just learning "Run to the Hills" about 2 weeks.
Oh, really? That's a hard song.
Yeah, it is a hard song. You got to be fast for that one. So
you were taken for a loop when he first asked you. I'm surprised they didn't teach you that in journalism school. When we're starting an interview, the co-host is supposed to cut off his partner mid-question and say, "Hey, wait a minute. What kind of music you listen to in high school?"
Yeah, well, that wasn't teed up all that well.
No,
you must have skipped that day. I mean, I know they teach it. Yeah,
but
I like that tradition. That's a good tradition to have.
But it was one of those things. Like if I didn't hit it at that moment, it would have been gone.
The crowd would have gotten restless. They want it. Yeah, that's true.
Where are the Eddie T-shirts? If you're going to do that, don't you need the Maiden shirts?
I've been invited by one of our viewers to go to his like private box for the Maiden show next year.
Nice.
Actually, that was the first concert I ever saw on my own.
Really?
Iron Maiden with Quiet Riot opening.
Where?
Madison Square Garden. I was 13, and I was so young, I literally paid for it with change out of my piggy bank in quarters. $13.50. That's how much the ticket was. I'll never forget because it was paid in quarters.
That is excellent. That's excellent. I saw Maiden across the street at Radio City, and there was a guy smoking a joint that was rolled with typing paper. It was that big. I'd never seen anything like that before in my life. It was amazing. Great show. Yeah.
They put on a great show.
They do. Yeah.
Yeah, they're on a big tour next fall, I guess, right? That's the tour.
No, it's November.
Arena's cool. Well, yeah, you were mentioning when we were setting this up how, you were kind of dreading going back to Washington, having to do round 2 with, Plaskett and Wasserman Schultz and Dan Goldman. Was Dan Goldman in Congress the first time, or is he new? He was there, right? Yeah. That's right, because that was earlier this year. That was March. Or no, that was later.
It was March.
Yeah, it was after, right. Yes. So you mentioned how that was going to be, this drag of an experience, and I'm sure it was, but the universe did throw you a bone by shit canning Mehdi Hassan at MSNBC. Yeah. He was canceled.
Hey, you know what? I can't even feel like glee about that, because I don't know. I mean, he's kind of I think he should be speaking out a little bit about why they fired him. So that just speaks to his character a little bit. I mean, Mehdi got me good in that interview. I mean, and that's all's fair in love and war, and I was not prepared, and he was, and he's good at that shit. That's where he makes his living. But it was the stuff that happened afterward that got me angry, where he was trying to get me sewn up over what was really a mistake on their part, and
yeah, he implied you had perjured yourself. I mean, it really went just crazy.
Exactly. I mean, I think that there's ambitious, and then there's a level beyond that where he lives. And I've never really understood people who are like that. But although I just can't take that much pleasure in his firing. No, I did see that happen. I think as the event, the testimony was taking place, though. It was that day, right?
I would think so. It was earlier this week, so whenever that was, we did the show Wednesday, so I think it was Tuesday that it happened.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those
AOC
things.
jumped on that too, didn't she? AOC after the Mehdi Hassan, she's he should be tried for perjury.
Yeah, and then we heard like the whole leadership was in on that whole thing, and that's why I was fully expecting that they were going to try to lead me into some kind of questioning that was designed to get me wrapped up in some kind of contempt of Congress charge.
Right.
But they clearly got some kind of a PR advisory from, probably from some Burson Marsteller type firm. And they didn't engage us at all, except for Dan Goldman, who did, I think, just because his personality wouldn't let it go. The rest of them didn't even look at us. All they did was they had this other witness, Olivia Troy, there, whose entire purpose was to talk about how bad Donald Trump was. And this is, the Democratic Party's answer to everything is always but Trump. But this was like a parody version of that. Where
Yes.
They were holding like a separate hearing to just move over to like, yeah, but Trump. Every time they had time on the clock, and again, it's just I would love to hear what the real answer is. Like, why are you behind this stuff? And now I think we know. Like, this is their project. They want this. This is an important part of what they're trying to establish. And I think we have to let go of the illusion that there's anything left to the Democratic Party to appeal to. It's not there anymore. Does that make sense, right? I mean, I don't know.
No, yeah. I mean, it was a really funny moment to me. I can't remember which congressman it was, but he was questioning Troy. I can't even remember if it was a man or a woman. But they were so leading her into invoking Hitler. It was like,
oh my God.
And who does that remind you of? And she's like, the evil Hitler. And she said something like, I'm pretty sure that's what she said, the evil Hitler.
That's right. Yeah, it was the guy from Massachusetts. I forget what his name is. But yeah, he gave her the vermin setup, and she didn't take the cue that every MSNBC anchor has already said 5,000 times in the last.
Right.
Apparently, she watches the wrong channel in her off time. So they had to go back. They had to on the rebound.
Right.
Tell her, here's what your answer is.
Who does that remind you of? It was ridiculous, and you're right. I mean, it was so clear that they had gotten PR advice.
Right.
Like, listen, you got mocked from one end of the internet to the other for your last attempts to go after these guys, just pretend they're not there and talk about Donald Trump. Right. And minimize the Twitter files by constantly comparing it to other things that you claim are more important than freedom of speech in America. Minimize it by comparison.
Well, right, and so the one interesting thing is that in March when we testified, the argument was still being made that this was not really happening, that
right.
this was just a ridiculous conspiracy theory. The FBI had put out a statement, if you remember, in December, like there are conspiracy theorists on the internet who are saying that we did something wrong, and obviously this isn't true. And that was sort of the party line. Now this has been adjudicated in court. It's going to be in the Supreme Court. We've had 4 federal judges say we think this is very likely in violation of the First Amendment. We're letting this injunction stand because of that. Well, now it's being repealed for other reasons, but so they can't say it's not happening. So instead, they've moved on to, well, either it's a good thing or we need. I mean, that's the implication, right? With all this stuff. Oh, Donald Trump is so scary that we need to have these tools in place to prevent Hitler. But they don't defend the program. They don't defend what they're talking about. They just say that. So this is very frustrating.
Well, you mentioned how, the Democratic Party is totally hopeless, and this is a large reason why, and I think you're absolutely right about that. But the Israel war has really kind of fractured some of the alliances, or at least short-term partnerships that, like, some of us on the left have made with those sort of across the aisle on the subject of speech. Like, we've seen a lot of, right of center, supposed free speech champions sort of reveal themselves to be very one-sided in their commitments, while a lot of, left-wing or liberal anti-free speech sort of bullies like Mehdi Hassan, right down to, I would argue, like the rank and file student bodies at these Ivy League universities, right? Very pro-censorship until they get censored for protesting the Israel war. We've seen student peace groups get suspended from schools and things like that. And some on the right, not all, but some of the right have cheered that on, calling them, terrorist sympathizers and stuff like that. So do you have any observations about that sort of crackdown on like campus speech, pro-Palestine speech, pro-ceasefire speech? And I guess the B part of that would be, as someone like yourself who's been branded both left and right wing, depending on who's doing the branding and when, how can we build like meaningful, long-lasting, cross-partisan consensus in defense of the actual principle of free speech?
I mean, that's a great question, right? I mean, it was even worse than that. I mean, some countries just outright banned, protests.
Yeah, in France, they said you're not allowed here. In Germany, they didn't technically ban it, but the cops would break up every protest that they could find until it got too big, which thankfully many of them did.
Exactly, yeah. And then there were some campuses that were doing similar things right here in the States. And it was a little frustrating for me because this is one of the things that I've been saying all along is that, this kind of censorship affects Palestinians. It has for years. Glenn Greenwald wrote about this in 2016. That was actually one of the first times that we saw this deal, which is implicit in this kind of censorship where, a company like Facebook in Palestine is like the only media that there is. It's the only functioning way that people can communicate with each other, get news. And so when Facebook made a deal basically with the Mossad, and I think it was 2015, 2016, and they ended up having an arrangement where Glenn reported it was 95% of requests were fulfilled in 2016. And that was the first of these arrangements, and we saw it even with the CTI files that we did, a week ago, earlier this week, that Michael Schellenberger and I wrote. There was a free Palestine hashtag. There was the UNCPR. It's another American, pro-Palestinian organization. They were being monitored as a threat. So it's not just a right-wing thing, and this is always the case. But the problem is, man, we thought at this whole experience of the last 3 or 4 years had finally convinced Republicans, like, you got to stay on the principle on this thing, because look at how hard you can be hit with this.
Right.
And the instant this happened, you saw there's this massive defection of people who'd been saying the exact opposite for the last 2-3 years. And that's, it's pretty upsetting. Although I still think a large part of the caucus is going to end up being, on the pro-free speech side, at least through the 2024 election, because they're scared of another election integrity partnership type of thing developing. But I don't know. What's your conclusion about that? Because I think you're right. Like, they've managed to rope in people, on both sides. And partly it's a generational thing. There's just, both left and right, there just isn't that kind of tradition of respecting free speech and respecting free dialogue anymore.
Yeah, I think some people see it. Sorry, Russell. I think some people see it. Like, I thought Tucker Carlson, when he spoke about this, not as it pertains to the Israel war, but he's spoken about how when you don't have freedom of discourse, freedom to say what you think is true. One of his last broadcasts on Fox News before he got fired was defending the African Socialist Party from a sort of Russiagate type charge. I think some people have understood, some people have come to understand, and I came to understand this in 2016, that if we don't have the ability to exchange ideas and opinions, then our differences don't matter. Like, whatever political differences between left and right are irrelevant if you're not able to voice those differences in a way that can actually make a difference, if it's all controlled in this very top-down way. I don't know why it's so difficult for most people to understand that. I think it's because most people, and this is going to sound like an extreme hair-on-fire libtard thing to say, but most people have fascistic tendencies. Most people think that they're right, and if they can crush the other side, then the world will be a better place. Like, I think that drive exists in the average person.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. It's just sad,
Yeah.
I certainly grew up with a different tradition. I never thought like that.
Yeah,
and not only did I not think like that, I remember being taught the exact opposite, like
right.
over and over and over again, that it was important to fight for people who have loathsome point of views. Like, that's a crucial part of understanding what the First Amendment is. And they've gone away from teaching that. There was an important moment, I think, when the ACLU, there was some division after Charlottesville, right? Like, remember there was an editorial in the New York Times saying we have to rethink our approach.
Right.
Maybe we didn't get Skokie right, that kind of thing. And now, I think you're right, Keaton. Like, it doesn't matter what our differences are if we can't hash out, if we can't even see them. You know what I'm saying? Like,
exactly.
If they're not visible, and we're just sitting in siloed areas and not even aware of the opposite arguments. I mean, that's been another eye-opening thing for me, is I still, to this day, talk to people who are in the business who don't know like 99% of the stuff that I worked on in the last year, and have assumptions that they got because they watch 1 or 2 channels, and that's it. And so even kicking and screaming and throwing a fit as much as we did in the last year, it doesn't really do much in the end, because they can so effectively silo people now. And if both sides are going to do it and be cool with it, then there's no hope at all.
That has been one of the biggest disappointments with the reaction to Palestine. Although there have been some hopeful elements. Mm-hmm. Look, I'm not going to lie, and I'm not going to ask you to take a position. For me personally, Douglas Murray was a big disappointment. He is definitely somebody who I've talked about his book on the show, and I've said I don't agree with everything in it, but the core idea that holding up Western civilization for special derision, as if its sins are unique to itself and no other cultures have ever done things like this, is foolish. It's a false premise. It's a complete misunderstanding of history. And he was so masterful in that monk debate. You know,
Yeah,
it was such a great champion of speech, and to see the way that he has reacted since this war has broken out, it just absolutely, and it makes you feel foolish because you're sitting there and you're arguing with people who are saying, well, this is the fox and the scorpion, right? You can't really ally with these people because in the end, you get to the other side, they're going to sting you.
Right, right. And yeah, I mean, I think Douglas, I would have thought he would come down more on being a champion of the Enlightenment, right? That's been kind of his brand,
Right.
throughout. And obviously, you know, I only got to know him a little bit through that debate. We have some different views and some, you know, specific issues, but I think the basic premise was that, you know, Western civilization has done some tremendous things. He's accomplished some amazing things because of the enormous energy that all these Enlightenment ideas generate. And we have to protect them at all costs and not go backwards. At the very least, not go backwards, right? For all the other sins of Western civilization, let's not go back and ruin the things that actually work.
Exactly.
You can argue about all sorts of things that you know, America, the UK, all the Five Eyes nations, you know, the imperialistic behavior, the militaristic behavior since World War II. There's a lot of stuff to criticize, and you know, I've done a lot of that over the years. But there are also incredible things. I mean, America has been home to unbelievable innovation, art, comedy, all these things that wouldn't have been possible if we had not had some kind of serious effort to try to protect these values. You know, I talked to a pretty high-profile lawyer a couple of weeks ago, and who talked about how after World War II, America at least aspirationally did start to actually become like a rule of law society in a way that was kind of unique in history, right? Like the important moments in our history happened in courtrooms, and what happened in those courtrooms mattered. But,
Right.
you know, do we want to go back to when that isn't true anymore? And that's what people seem to be arguing for. Like, you know, they're basically saying democracy doesn't work. We have to just use force to shut things down. And that's really sad, you know, and it's sad to see people you would have thought, you know, take the other position, go there.
Well, Russell, why don't we get into these hearings? Because you had a question to set us up on that, right?
Yeah, yes, I did. Just one other thing on that. You know, with Zionism specifically, it's very ironic because it's very much they immediately saw what the problem was with speech is violence, right? They immediately saw what the problem is with that formulation, what an attack it is on the core premises of the First Amendment. That's a way of trying to have your cake and eat it too, right? You say you believe in freedom of speech, but speech you don't like is violence, so it's not protected by the First Amendment, right? Because violence isn't protected by it. It's a very dishonest formulation. They're doing with Zionism, they're getting around their supposed free speech bona fides by claiming that it's anti-Semitism or more that it's eliminationist, right? They have to take it to eliminationist because even anti-Semitism under their own premises would kind of be protected. So they have to take it to eliminationist, right? They have to take it, which is another way of saying language is violence, isn't it? I mean, it's.
Well, this is the whole. It's an existential threat, right?
Right.
Like everything
Right.
is an existential threat, and I mean, interestingly, like in the last year, I've had, you know, if you go back and you look at a lot of the underlying premises of like the war on terror, you know, I've had to study people like Carl Schmitt, who was a a Nazi jurist from the 30s who was very influential on a lot of the neocons who were sort of building Dick Cheney's war on terror machinery. They very much believed in this idea that in an emergency situation, liberal democracy is basically bullshit, and that power belongs to the executive who seizes it, and that this is done because a core premise of the belief system is that there are friends and enemies, and our enemies mean to destroy us by violence. And this is a central part of the idea, is that justifying the use of absolute force. We have to, because if we don't, they will eliminate us, they will destroy us. And so what you're seeing with the Zionist argument is basically it's actually a more direct version of what we got after 9/11. All of those homilies, they hate us for our freedom,
Yeah.
blah blah blah. It was never really believable in any way that Al Qaeda was actually going to wipe the United States off the face of the earth, even though they tried.
God damn it with their 7-Elevens.
I mean, my favorite was always Bush. Was it Bush who talked about them spraying poison from drones over New York City, and not explaining where the drones were going to be taking off from? That was my favorite one. But it was always the idea that anybody was going to actually wipe out the United States was ludicrous. So they never really made that argument.
Right.
They just sort of said that this is a clash of civilizations. They hate us. They will never stop. It's like a Terminator. Israel is openly saying, like, you must back what we're doing because they mean to remove us from the face of the earth. And there's at least a patina of believability in that rhetoric, and that's why they're getting away with saying it. But you have to understand that. I mean, I think that this is just a version of the same argument we've been getting for 20 years.
We have to fight them here so that they don't come for you.
Right, exactly. And we have to exercise force because we must presume that our enemies mean to eliminate us. And that's the excuse for then you're right back in Dostoevsky land. Like, everything is permitted once you get there mentally. That not only will harm befall us, but that we will cease to exist if we allow this other side to speak, act, have political agency, any of those things. And that's how they get away with making these arguments. And it's been baffling, I guess not baffling, but it's just been disappointing to see how effective it's been.
Well, but surprisingly, and here's the hopeful thing, you very kindly shared my article about this. Mm-hmm. The woke students, the last people you would have expected to be the cavalry for speech, all of a sudden took the side of the Palestinians. They actually, remarkably, took seriously what they've been told for at least the last 10 years by all these academics, that it's not right to back a colonial project that is aimed at the genocidal destruction of a group of marginalized brown people. But that's a real problem for these universities that get a lot of money from the Defense Department.
Well, right. Yeah. No, and it is at least hopeful, right, that they're sticking to their principles enough that they're going to end up protesting the restrictions that have been placed on them to speak out, right? And the formulations that have been made, like, in this very slapdash way, almost overnight. This is it's terrorism. It's celebrating terrorist violence. It's harm. Watching conservatives invoke harm has been comical, but they've done it. But I just wonder how lasting a commitment to those values you're going to get from that crowd. I mean, you're absolutely right, Russell, and you're correct to point it out. But I don't know. What do you think? I mean, do you think that they're going to see things the same way with other issues? That's what I worry about.
The question is really whether this is a red pill moment for them, whether they realize from the pushback they're getting, as so many of us, I know for me personally, the Bernie Sanders was such a red pill moment for me because of the pushback the campaign got. That was what made me realize that everything the institutions I had trusted believed was total bullshit. Everything they told me they
right. It wasn't
was
just that they had it in for Bernie; it's that everything they said was full of shit, as indicated by their response to the threat of a Democratic Socialist winning the nomination. Right.
Right. So now that they see that everything they've been told by these institutions that supposedly cared so much about marginalized identities and colonization, as long as you're talking about people who have been dead for 150 years, they cared a lot.
Right. Yeah, exactly. If it interferes with any Carlyle Group contracts or, Lockheed Martin or anybody else who's funding the new science center,
right.
And that's the thing. A lot of these kids are 19 years old. They have no idea how shit works. It takes a while to learn how all the money flows work and why it is that you're a professor who's saying one thing today will say something else tomorrow because the grant's going to be on the line now. They're going to learn all this stuff in high speed, and hopefully that will teach them that behind all the rhetoric they've been getting for a while are these institutions, and these institutions are what matter. And this is this has been a frustration of mine just with reporting in general in America. Like they always try to distract people with personalities and hot takes on politics, whereas the thing that you always got to focus on is which institutions are behind what, because they're the ones that are lasting. They have the lasting impact on the situation, and that's what's been so scary about this story. Is that they, in addition to all the war on terror stuff that we saw before, like the extraordinary rendition, like the secret prison complexes, this new project, is global in scope. It involves all the same groups, the same military and intelligence partnerships, and now they want to, have absolute dominion over what kinds of topics and narratives are going to be seen by the entire world. I mean, that's a really radical, terrifying thing to countenance, and I guess you have to realize that it's a bridge. It's a long bridge to cross for some people. It takes a while for them to get there, but this is probably an introductory moment for some of those folks. You're right.
Yeah, and the truth of it is kind of hidden in plain sight. I mean, I always recognized it. I mean, I didn't spend much time in college, but I could see going in that academia is not a bludgeon to be wielded against the establishment. Academia is a gateway into the establishment, especially these Ivy League universities. Look at the list of famous alumni from Harvard, Yale, Brown, Columbia. For every quote-unquote revolutionary that's emerged out of there, you can find at least 100 counter-revolutionaries who you can identify by name. Like, it's the most obvious thing in the world when you think about it for 2 seconds. Again, that's not the easiest thing, I guess, for an 18-year-old to realize, when they fill out the forms.
My favorite moment for that was the 2004 presidential election when you had 2 Skull and Bones members running.
2 Skull and Bones, exactly, right. Yeah.
Come on now. Right? Like, a lot of young people who go to these, very, very expensive schools that are clearly designed, that their whole purpose is to mold young, smart kids to become parts of, the elite machinery. And there's a logic to that. That's what societies do, right? They try to take their best and brightest and turn them into people who can man, the appropriate positions. But what are those institutions that they're going to? I mean, you have to be kind of blind to not see, if you're a Yale student, that they're looking for people to go work on Wall Street, to work in the defense sector if you're a science student, and then or intelligence. Like they're getting all their people from your campus. I mean, they have recruiting tables. If you don't see that, by the time you're at least a junior at one of those schools, you're making an effort not to pay attention,
I think you're exactly right, because at that point you realize, hey, this is about making a lot of money, and at that point you also realize I'm in line to make a lot of money if I just play along. Right? Exactly.
Right. And look, that's legitimate. Young people, especially now, it's tough, right? Like you're either looking at a lifetime of having 6 roommates and never even sniffing owning a house, or you can go to door number 2 and have a job that, hey, maybe it's not so morally abhorrent that I won't be able to sleep every single night. You will start to make those calculations, especially when the economy is as bad as it is, and I understand that. But don't lie to yourself and about what it is, and that's what's been frustrating.
Exactly.
Is seeing all this self-righteousness
Right.
About things when, come on,
Right. You're there to make a buck. That's what everybody goes to college for. Okay. Right.
But I think in some respects, not to play the role of the hopeful person here, but I'm gonna. In some respects, you've recreated the conditions that caused the uprisings of the 60s and 70s, because that was also very much a response to elite students realizing that the values of the machine that they were being trained to join did not match the values they were told America had. They were not raised to think, well, no, it's okay to give separate but equal accommodations. They were raised to believe America was this place that believed in equality, and then they started looking at what America actually was, and they got red-pilled. It was just the bridge between the values they had been taught to embrace and the realities of the society they lived in were just too great for them to swallow it. And it seems like you've kind of recreated that here, because you've drilled into them colonialism is the worst thing in the world. To go after marginalized non-white people is the worst thing in the world. Hey, you need to get behind Israel while it bombs the hell out of these Palestinians. It just doesn't square. It just doesn't square. And it's causing, I think, look, we'll see how it plays out. You're right. I mean, could they wind up just deciding to keep their heads down? Sure. But you know what? There is more to people than just looking for those jobs. There are core values. And if you've inculcated people with these values for years and years and years, I mean, it's just wall to wall, they've been surrounded by it in the culture, right? White privilege and elevating marginalized groups, and it's just too much cognitive dissonance to tell them now they have to get behind Israel as it commits war crimes.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and there certainly was like a parallel thing that happened in the early 60s. The free speech movement in Berkeley. There were an awful lot of kids who were realizing, hey, I'm going to end up building weapons that are going to be deployed against poor Vietnamese kids. I don't want to do that, right? So I think the gigantic difference, though, is that the 60s in America were a time of enormous plenty, right? And there was an awful lot of room to just sort of drop out of society and make your way, right, somehow. There wasn't this like desperation.
We had factories back then. That's true.
All right.
Right? Yeah. And that was very wealthy, yeah, exactly. Like, the Mrs. Robinson generation, they had a lot of options, and I think that was a big factor in the decision to rebel in the way that they did. But we'll see. I hope you're right, that this is a wake-up call moment for those folks, but maybe it won't be. We'll see.
It's a fair point. It's definitely easier to blow off the man when the man has 5 jobs on offer for every applicant.
Right.
Right.
But this one, you're right. I mean, there's such cognitive dissonance with the way with this story that it's going to be very tough for a lot of these kids to to square all the contradictory messages they've been getting. But we'll see.
Oh, and also remember, in the end, most of those kids didn't give up that prosperity. Most of them didn't go Jim Ignatowski and drive a cab. Most of them wound up back inside the system, but a system changed enough that they could tolerate it.
Well, right, and that's the Christopher Lash, his books were, all about that. The sort of way people like Jerry Rubin kind of effortlessly
Right.
Morphed from being sort of leftist radicals to being, sort of young entrepreneurial capitalists.
Right.
And they went straight from being the yippies to starting up companies like Apple. And yeah, I mean that's what that generation was all about. This one I think is different though. I think they're a little bit harder core in their politics. At least their starting place was, so I'll have a harder time seeing them just sort of, just move into Silicon Valley and, start up death.com or whatever the next iteration of this whole system is, but we'll see.
All right, my erstwhile partner is going to stab me if I don't get into the congressional hearings.
Let's do the hearings.
All right, so that was the warm-up act, folks. Yeah. All right, so in one of your articles, you thanked Jim Jordan for investigating the IRS, visiting your house, and he did a broad investigation that's actually led to a reform that they're not going to do that anymore. And you closed out the article saying, I gave votes to the editorial note Democratic Party for 30 years. Which elected Democrat would have performed basic constituent services in my case? Feel free to raise a hand. If silence is the answer, why should I ever vote for a Democrat again? And in another article, you quoted your podcast co-host Walter Kern regarding Democrats saying, stopping them electorally is probably the only way forward. So what are you trying to tell us, Matt? Are you post-duopoly, or do you have an announcement to make on the show about your party affiliation?
I mean,
you don't have any bright red Adidas hats that you can wear to these interviews?
I have a full red Adidas hat. But it's a tough pill to swallow, but they got I think even that hearing this week, though, was kind of an epiphany for me, because Schellenberger and I, going into the hearing, we had strategized. What are we trying to accomplish with this? And one of the things that we've been trying to do is, reach out to people who were erstwhile Democratic voters and try to convince them that this issue should matter to them and why it should matter to them. And so I spent a lot of time trying to formulate arguments about why this is really a class thing. Not only is it going to affect issues like, Palestinian activism or healthcare for all or whatever, take your pick. There were lots of other things that we found in both the Twitter files and the CTI files that were aimed at the left as well. But, in the course of the last year or so, it's become abundantly clear to me that the Democratic Party is just fundamentally intertwined with this project, that this is their project. The Republicans are really outsiders in this thing, in ways that they weren't during the War on Terror years. If Dick Cheney was the leading proponent of programs like extraordinary rendition, torture, enhanced interrogation, all that stuff, the mainstream Republican Party basically needs to, get an invitation to even sit at the table at the discussions for things like the Global Engagement Center, the CISA, the programs that they're trying to institute. There are no Republicans involved in many of these projects, not that I've been able to see. And you can see at this hearing that there are no Democrats standing up and arguing this issue, or even trying to tell you why they think it matters, because this is them, right? Like when you're talking about this issue, you're talking about something that's just fundamental to their entire brand of politics now. So they're going to have to be beaten at the polls. I don't know if it'd be very tough for me to imagine voting for Donald Trump, but I've already decided that at the very least I'm going to be voting for somebody like West or Kennedy. I mean, it's going to have to be something like that. But they can't win. They got to suffer a loss over this stuff, because this stuff is incredibly dangerous, and it's not just about speech; it's about politics. That's the thing that's so scary about it. And if the next step happens and you have like an American style version of the Digital Services Act, then it's just 1984 territory from there. So. I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, can you explain for our viewers what the Digital Services Act is?
So this is the EU's big speech regulation. It's a regulation of the internet that was passed last year. It's a gigantic regulatory framework, and it has basically a system wherein private platforms like X, Twitter, or Facebook, or Google have to partner up with these people who are called trusted flaggers. And these are credentialed sort of news readers designated by the European Union. And they are, they're number in the thousands. And basically, if the companies do not abide by the recommendations of the EU's trusted flaggers, if they allow too much of X kind of speech or Y kind of speech or whatever, then they suffer basically crippling financial penalties. You're going to see this play out with Twitter soon, because Elon so far has refused to do it. Essentially, this is just censorship, right? It's basically saying if you don't go along with these recommendations, you're going to pay fines that will put you out of business. That's the model, and it's already, because these companies are global, it already has a huge impact on what you can see, even about something like Gaza, right, or the other side of Ukraine war. I mean, where do you go to look to find out what's actually happening in Ukraine? There's nowhere to look, right? And that's not an accident. So they've been, there are a couple of laws. There's the Restrict Act was the first attempt to really draw up what that legislation would look like in America, but they don't really even need it. All they would need is just more things like that in other parts of the world, and these companies will just do that work on their own. But I do think they're eventually going to try to pass something like that here.
Yeah, I mean, you asked, what do we think the solution is, and I think the answer lies in examining kind of how the Republicans became outsiders in this whole process, in this whole regulation of speech process and project. And I think they were forced into it by the base. I mean, they wanted to box Trump out of that primary in 2016, but there was a populist revolt within the party, and the base of the party literally dragged them into not necessarily, as we articulated earlier, this very principled civil liberties stand, but they got sort of Steve Bannonized into it, right? The dismantling of the administrative state, as he would call it, right? Just a suspicion of concentrated power, a rejection of top-down control over the day-to-day lives of ordinary people. And with that came sort of an implicit rejection of a lot of the Bush-era posturing of the GOP. The problem, of course, as you mentioned, is that the Democrats made and continue to make such a populist revolt within their party impossible. They have put in place structural barriers that literally wall that off. They just canceled the Florida Democratic primary. Canceled it. No vote. Right? They put Biden on the ballot. They wouldn't put anybody else on the ballot. That's it. So that makes the Democratic Party a closed door. That's what Russell and I've been saying for now, the past few years. West, sure, if he could get on a ballot, that'd be nice. He voluntarily took himself off of 17 state ballots when he switched from Green to Independent. RFK, I mean, I couldn't go into a voting booth and pull the lever for RFK, given the things that he's said and signaled he'll do as regard to this conflict.
Hillary Clinton, so, I mean...
What's that?
I voted for Hillary Clinton, so my tolerance for voting for... I'm sorry.
I got you. I'm just saying, like, in terms of...
Fair enough.
In terms of, like, okay, who are we going to vote for? Who are we going to vote for? I've punted. Like, I'm not going to rack my brains and worry about it now. I'm not excited about anybody. This is a hopeless election. That's why the Free Palestine protests are inspiring to me, because I see some activism. I see real pressure being exerted on the system, and out of that must come something, because that's really the only hope I see right now.
Yeah. I was hoping that, maybe there will be a meeting of the minds, right, where the Free Palestine activists will sort of make some kind of a bridge with other populist movements and realize that ultimately, at the heart of this thing there's militarism and authoritarianism. That's the common theme. I think a lot of different factions are going to end up realizing that they have a common enemy, right? I think enemy is the wrong word, but
no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
oh, sure.
I think it's fair enough. Yeah,
I think that's the right word.
Yeah.
The frustration for me though is just, okay, if Gaza, Palestine, I understand that's an animating issue for a lot of people, but this thing that's happening in the United States, this sort of building of this intelligence surveillance state, it is a long developing story that goes back 20 years now. Even things like the sort of subtle rollbacks of the church committee reforms, right? So after the 70s, the FBI used to have a reason to open a file on you. They used to have a reason to investigate you, to surveil you. They stopped doing that, right? And those FBI whistleblowers who came out last year, I interviewed some of those guys, and they would talk about how, like, there are FBI offices where half the agents are not doing work that goes to a case, and they just sit there gathering information. Or as one guy put it to me, they'll just post up outside houses, right? They'll just sit there in vans watching people. That is massively fucked up. I mean, Gaza aside, you have to realize that they're building something here in the U.S. right now that is terrifying, is going to last beyond whatever happens over there in Israel. And I think a lot of people just don't know about it because this issue has been so successfully kept under wraps. I'm not making a very good case for this, but it's just been very frustrating to watch because they've successfully coded all this as a right-only thing, and sure, all the people who seem to care about this in the Bush years are suddenly gone, and
yes,
them, and that's what's frustrating.
Well, yeah, that's, I think, is the most frustrating part about it. Anyway, I got some video to play, but Russell, did you want to say something first?
Well, they've played on the class snobbery of what was the old Rockefeller Republican base in order to get them to basically swallow anything. as long as it's framed as an attack on those people.
Right.
It's those people. Well, I saw somebody share a meme today, and I've seen this before, but it's somebody I know is like a wealthy, successful Hollywood type. This guy with, showing a yacht convinced this guy, and it shows a guy in the plaid shirt, that this guy is the cause of his problems, and it shows migrants picking, fruit. Well, how about liberals convince themselves that they didn't abuse this guy to such an extreme that now they want to blow up the entire system? Like that, they will never examine it that way. And it seems, and I'm going to get into this because lately in both your congressional testimony and in your article about, I always want to say CLIT, where they C-T-I-L.
Never thought about that. Wow.
You should have figured out a way to name it CLIT. It would have gotten a lot of eyeballs. You're frustrated this isn't getting enough attention. Maybe you should try coming up with some catchier acronyms.
Penetrating the mystery of the CLIT style.
Yeah, there you go. That'll get some Substackers pouring in.
Right.
But you've been focusing in on that class dimension, which we'll be getting into, which I agree with. But Keaton, you want to go to some video?
Yeah, I feel like we have to show this video of Matt, your friend Debbie Wasserman Schultz, asking you one of the most ludicrous questions I've ever heard asked anyone in any hearing at all, about what an absolutist you are and where you draw the line in terms of what should be allowed on the internet.
All of us here today have heard the stories of the depths of human depravity from the Hamas attack, resulting in unthinkable brutality, including the mass murder of innocent Jews and civilians on October 7th. Witnessing such barbarity steals part of your humanity, and it demonstrates how hatred can drive humans to do unspeakable things to one another. And nowhere is hatred more evident than on social media. Since the October 7th attack, anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate speech has exploded online. In just 1 month after the attack, the hashtag Hitler was right appeared in over 46,000 posts. But the rhetoric isn't limited to hate speech and death threats. Jewish conspiracy theories and disinformation continually find safe harbor on social media platforms. Even the racist and anti-Semitic Great Replacement theory was recently amplified on Twitter/X by none other than its owner, Elon Musk, and the right-wing darling, Tucker Carlson. Terrorists use the platforms to terrorize target populations, and Hamas even used the personal accounts of hostages and victims to live stream their brutality to incite further violence. Mr. Taibbi, yes or no, should social media companies allow rape and murder to be live streamed by terrorists on their platforms in order to create fear and incite violence?
I believe that would violate their terms of service.
So your answer is no? It should not they should not be allowed to do that?
Live stream rape and murder? No,
Right.
I think that would count as...
Good answer. Nice one. I'll play that again.
So your answer is no? It should not they should not be allowed to do that?
Live stream rape and murder? No,
Right.
I think that would count as...
Now, look, I know they
speech that
sent
would
the
be-
IRS to your house, and I know, you're under oath, so you got to be careful about sarcasm. But how tempting was it to just be like, yes, I think they should be allowed to. In fact, that's why Elon and I had a falling out, because I called him a hypocrite. I said, you should really be allowing people to live stream their murders on Twitter.
Yeah, it probably should have. The problem is that the Congress is designed to make you like paranoid and intimidated, and so your instinct for humor. Actually, I admire Schellenberger for this because he's able to do this. But I get so focused on like not saying the wrong thing. But yeah, I should have said something like that. I should have been like, yeah, no, I'm all for that. They should have.
Right.
They should bring back as many snuff films as possible. But I mean, come on, what a ridiculous tactic! Like, are you in favor of the Sinaloa cartel chainsawing heads off on
Right. I mean, well, she refers to something that clearly does not fall under free speech. Live streamed rape and murder is not a speech issue at all. And then she tries to use that to checkmate you here. There's a bit more.
Yeah.
Live stream rape and murder? No,
Right.
I think that would count as speech that would be prohibited under their terms.
Good. You do have absolutist policies, but
I do not have absolute. I do not have.
Please don't interrupt me. You have absolute. I've asked your question. You answered it. You do have absolutist policies. At least they have some limits. But I think a Homeland Security official.
With respect, Congresswoman, all journalists operate
reclaiming
under
my time.
limits.
If a Homeland Security official echoed your opinion, you would call it censorship. But I'm glad that at least you acknowledge that rape and murder should not be allowed.
No. If a Homeland Security official said you're not allowed to live stream murder, Matt Taibbi here, now you're with us. You can settle this. Would you consider that censorship?
No, of course not.
Okay, there you go. Let's clip this, and maybe we can be played in the halls of Congress next time they call you in.
But you see, the tactic is so absurd. They don't want to ask you a difficult question. Should Hamas rhetoric be allowed on online? Right. Then we start to get into issues. This is like a stupid trial lawyer tactic. Goldman was actually funnier with this because he did it backwards. They usually do like, what color is the sky today, Mr. Taibbi? And
right.
Blue, right? Well, I'm glad you agree with me that the sky is blue. But he did the...
He messed it up and went to the punchline.
Yeah, he went to the punchline with the setup. But she's doing the same thing. Is she an attorney? I forget. Wasserman Schmuck.
Is she an attorney?
I don't know.
Is Wasserman Schmuck an
attorney? That's a little bit. But it's that kind of questioning. Like you will agree with me that this ridiculous thing I just said is true. Yeah, but that was particularly irritating because I've answered that question like 5 million times over the last few years, and one Google search would find me saying I am not a free speech absolutist. No, nobody is.
Right. Explain that, because one of the Republicans, not surprisingly, gave you a chance to fill that out. So what do you mean? Because you made you really explained that journalists actually favor limitations, but not these limitations that are legal and clear.
Right. So we're all trained. What's libel? What's defamation? What are the particularly dangerous forms of libel, right? Like libel per se, like that's the kind of thing where, somebody who sues you is going to have an automatically strong argument that you massively disrupted their ability to make money, to have a family. And so that's things like accusing somebody of sexual deviance, of, pedophilia, a very serious crime, right? That'll especially a financial crime that's going to impact your business. So you learn all these things, and
hence allegedly,
right? Hence allegedly, but more importantly, like you have to lock it down before you publish it, and it's important to have those rules because that not only does that keep us honest, but it also lets us know that when we're right, if we got the evidence and everything, that the law is going to protect us. All right. So those prohibitions, those restrictions, like, cases like New York Times v. Sullivan, those are very important for investigative journalists because they tell us exactly where the lines are, and how far you can go, and how much you can say with X amount of evidence, right? And without that, it would be terrifying. Like if there were no rules at all and people could just sue you, like this is a little bit the case in England, right? Where you can be right, 100% right, and still get creamed in court. Or
cancel you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, or cancel you, right? And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on, but
no.
All those rules we've always been in favor of those rules because they clarify the situation for us. And if we screw, if there's a mistake, it's adjudicated. You go before a court. You have a chance at least to argue that you got it right. this new system has no rules. You don't know where the line is. They can do anything to you at any time, and that's what's so scary. Like there's nothing to protect journalists. So anyway, that's just frustrating.
Well, no, that's what I was going to say. Like, that's the whole point. When they talk about terms of service, as Dan Goldman will talk about in the next clip that we have, and you talked about in that clip that we just saw, you know, I'm not against terms of service when it comes to a platform like YouTube where we are now. Like, to have terms of service is fine. They just have to be clear and they have to be enforced fairly with a human perspective. You can't just send an AI robot out there to enforce the terms of service. So, like, obviously, Debbie Wasserman Schultz used just a ridiculously extreme example of live streaming a horrific, violent crime.
Right.
But for example, like, there are certain pieces of video out of Gaza that we can't show on YouTube because it's too graphic, it's too violent, and we kind of know that because their rules about violent content are fairly clear, and so we just don't break them. But then they have other rules, like the one that Matt Orfalea, I guess, broke when he made that video that I think it was either for your outlet or you shared it about the 2016 election denialism on the Democrats' part. And he was making this point about how, you know, they're all over Donald Trump for denying the 2020 results. But here's this montage of Democrats basically insinuating that Russia stole the 2016 election. He wasn't making any claims at all about any election being invalid. He was simply making a point about how hypocritical the Democrats were. Of course, an AI robot sniffing around doesn't know that, and so they gave him a strike for that, and they took that down. And that's an example of the rules being really murky and not enforced with any consistency, any accountability. That's what makes it dangerous. So it's not that you want a Wild West situation where everyone can say everything up to including, you know, threats, slurs, things like that. No, have terms of service, but make them clear, like you were just talking about. It's important to have boundaries so that you know where they are and what they are.
Right, and you can even in YouTube, they can ding you for something that you haven't even published yet. It can be in the queue, ready to go, and the robot will detect it, and you know, you can get a strike for that. And this just gets back to the whole question of, like, do you want a rule of law society where you know, there's a set of clear rules, you get to argue it and, you know, before some kind of process. I mean, this is sort of basic America, Fifth Amendment stuff. You know, the terms of service, you would like it to approximate that, right? Where you would have some kind of process.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Yes.
Right. And they don't, right? And the problem with that is that I think there's this tendency now to just say it's okay for things to be done behind closed doors by you know, the quote unquote responsible people, and leave it at that, and you know, trust us. And you can't. That's the whole point. Right, like our whole society is built on the notion that you cannot trust people to exercise power in a responsible way. That you need to have checks and balances on it constantly, because people will screw other people, and you're seeing this drift towards this, you know, non-rules based society, which is very frustrating.
Well, Matt, let me ask you what you think about this, because you've written so much about the decline of the news business, and you've made it clear you're not saying that it was perfect in the past, but that it's definitely lost that core of principle of objectivity. And you even make the case that objective journalism was a business model, that it wasn't even necessarily noble. You don't even hold it up in that way. But, you know, with the death of Kissinger this week, we did a little piece on it through the lens of some of Hitchens' last words about Kissinger. And I said, you know, and we're almost exactly the same age. So you probably remember this from when you were a child. I remember when Kissinger was a pop star. Like there was a giant size Muhammad Ali versus Superman boxing comic book. And they had in the front row were all these celebrities of that era, and Kissinger was in that. You know, like that even for a children's comic book, they threw Kissinger in.
Right. Yeah.
So was the news media always essentially this bad in a certain sense? I mean, they definitely pumped up Kissinger as a rock star. You know, Joe Namath and Jacqueline Onassis, and he was in that pantheon of just really hip, cool, chic figures that you were supposed to love. And he was a monster.
Well, that's true, but he was a product of that era that, you know, we started to see this after World War II, when there was this movement toward, and Thomas Frank writes about this in his book, The People Know, that we got away from the idea of popular rule, programs done for the general population, and instead, let's just put the machinery of government in the hands of the best and the brightest, right? This like an enlightened managerial class, that became the new ideal. And Kissinger, for a lot of people, symbolized that system. He was the brilliant academic who, you know, could keep it all in his head. And for a lot of a certain kind of journalist, for those folks, you know, they adored everything about him, his accent,
Right.
you know,
his witticisms.
He did say some funny things. I mean, wasn't he the one who said the politics in academia are so vicious because the stakes are so low? Like he was capable of some very good one-liners, and as you know, journalists can have their pants charmed off rather quickly by anybody with, you know, an intellect over, you know, like a B plus. And he was a smart guy, and they loved him. But my counter to you would be that Cy Hirsch was also a rock star, and his whole, you know, raison d'etre was to expose Henry Kissinger as a monster. You know, he wrote that book, The Price of Power, that was a #1 bestseller, and talked about how Kissinger, you know, had the Secret Services monitoring all the phone traffic in Washington and giving him daily updates or weekly updates on anything anybody said about him, because he was such a narcissist. So yes, the press was always terrible. They were always sycophantic. I think there was a model for the mass media sycophant that became kind of institutionalized, especially in the Kennedy years forward. But we did always have this other thriving thing in journalism that was kind of oppositional, and that's what's disappeared. In the same way that the kind of, you know, Paul Wellstone, Russ Feingold type of liberal has disappeared from the caucus in the Democratic Party. They're just not there anymore, right? So that would be my answer. I don't know. What's your take on that?
I think you're right, but I also think, okay, so they killed this Cy Hirsch monster, right? By basically pulling all the Cy Hirsches out of the mainstream media, right? And marginalizing all of those kinds of voices. This is really the battle that I think you're stuck in the middle of, for good or for ill. The internet has reinvigorated those voices and arguably made them more powerful and more pervasive than ever before. It is terrifying to them that every figure that they speak against, like Joe Rogan, only gets more popular.
Right.
So they are trying to find a way to develop a legal framework by which to eliminate those voices, as they had arguably eliminated them for a while. They got rid of that.
I think that's exactly right. Like, you could even go back and pinpoint it. It starts with the Arab Spring, Occupy, Tea Party. They already started the counter movements then, but as soon as Brexit and Trump happened, that's suddenly there's money for the Global Engagement Center. There's the Department of Defense is pouring money into these weird domestic speech monitoring programs. Yeah, I think that's basically the plot. Is they had systematically kicked the noisome, troublesome investigative journalists out, the system. But the internet is so powerful that you don't even need to be, in a corporate institution anymore. So now they have to just close out every distribution system possible, and they're doing it, and that's why you have to go out kicking and screaming. I mean, and raising a fuss, and
well, and opening up your own shop. I mean, you were talking about this last time you were on, how the irony is that as much as they like to hand wring and pearl clutch, and even talk down to the independent journalists, like Substacker is like a dirty word. He's got a Substack, but you went to Substack. Greenwald initially went to Substack. Now he's on Locals. Same thing, though. Free speech, writing, multimedia platform. Cy Hirsch is on Substack now. And the ultimate irony is this: is like, as they've tried to box, pardon me, the sort of scrappy independent journalist out of the business. You said last time, and I think you're right, it's actually easier now to make a living as a journalist than it was back then, because you can do it on your own and build a following based on the strength of your work. If there's a big if, and this is what they're trying to crack down on, if there is actually a free and open internet.
Right, and I've already seen a huge difference even since the last time that we, have talked. All they have to do is limit the ability for things to be seen, change the algorithms, make it harder for the mass audience to see you. And, the great thing about Substack is that they can't do that, right? Because it's email. But the problem is the marketing. You still have to market somehow, right? And if you can't do it on X or Twitter, it becomes very, very difficult. So,
I mean, that had to be a heartbreaker. Let me just ask you that point blank now that you touched on that. So you do the Twitter files with Elon, thinking that this is part of some broader free speech, anti-censorship effort. And then he turns around and he throttles Substack links, not just so that you can't get your work out there, but it became impossible or not worthwhile for us to write our little blogs that we did, because there was no way to share them around. If you don't have a small email list and you can't put them up on X, that just kills you. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what was that like when you found out that this guy was gonna basically shut that door in your face after everything you did with him and for him?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that was a tough week, because that was like the day after the Medi thing happened too.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember saying exactly the same thing. I remember saying that when we covered it. I'm like, God damn.
Yeah.
What a 1-2 punch. Yeah.
Look, the money thing is very frustrating, because I don't think it's an accident that Barry and I and Schellenberger were the key people involved in the Twitter files, because without the ability to take a long break or enough of a financial cushion from an existing subscriber base to do a long research project, it would have been impossible, right? Your average Substack person who depends on that money for a living has to crank out content at a huge rate in order to actually put food on the table. And the Twitter files, people forget the content was going out on that everybody was looking at was on Twitter.
Right.
They weren't buying it on Substack, so it was great visibility for us. But the money, was really oddly enough, I got more of a financial bounce out of the hearings in March than from the Twitter files. But yeah, this whole thing with Elon has been very frustrating, because not just me, but a lot of his loudest supporters were on Substack. And, I think he was trying to buy the platform. I think he was trying to buy Substack, and they wouldn't allow it. And
wow.
The guy doesn't understand. He has his understanding of like what things look like to an actual journalist is strange. Like we had an argument about it, and he's like, well, why wouldn't you just move to Twitter subs? And I said, well, first of all, because we get a lot of shit for it, but second of all, why would I ever put my financial like existence in the hands of somebody who's already censored me, right?
Right.
That's like a massive business mistake. I can't, it would be suicide, but it's suicide anyway if you can't market on Twitter. So, but that's my problem.
Well, it's not just your problem. It's a huge problem.
No, it's
because
everyone's problem.
It's everyone's problem because it's so antithetical to like his mission statement, quote unquote, when he bought what's now X, right? I mean, like the whole point was for people to be able to share what they say, and then he made this like very proprietary move. Whereas, well, because I don't know. Now you just told I had no idea that was in the offing, that he was trying to buy it. But it makes sense because he was pissed off about their Substack notes copying his format, or he said something about API. I don't know. That's all Greek to me. Yeah, but it was just a real kick in the head.
I mean, the outrage about Substack trying to steal his business by doing notes. This was after he had tried to get me to move to Twitter subs, so he's trying to take Substack's business,
right?
And and he's outraged that they're building their own community there. None of it made any sense. But most of all, it was frustrating just because it put a lid on. I mean, I would love to be able to speak out more about the shit that's happening with Elon, right? The things that are going on in Europe, the Media Matters things. But I'm forced every time I write about that or talk about that to point out this guy is not exactly, a supporter of free speech. I mean, it's right. Very mercenary with him. So it's an enormously frustrating thing. But my experience with media, though, is that it tends to find a way, right? Like there tends to always be some kind of way that people get around whatever the obstacles are. However, we're getting to the point where that's like going to end up being standing on a street corner. That's what I'm a little bit worried that that's where we're headed.
Well, because that's the only real with the advent of the internet came the potential for like a truly democratized and globalized public square. And that's why they have to crack down on it, because the elites don't want a democratized public square. They want the public square to be exactly what you just said, standing on a street corner where only 50 or 60 people walk by you at a time, and so that's your maximum reach at any given moment. As opposed to what we're doing now, we have 2,500 people watching us right now as we speak, and we're a relatively small channel. You had 2 million followers. I mean, your Twitter account was on fire. I mean, you were one of the most viral accounts there was. You'd tweet something out within seconds. It would have thousands of likes and retweets and shares. That's an amazing platform. But ultimately, the elites don't want it. The Democratic Party doesn't want it. And Elon doesn't really want it either, apparently. I mean, it's a brand for him, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot. I don't know the full story, right? It was a little bit suspicious to me that the Twitter files, I mean, whatever his personal differences were with me, it was pretty conspicuous that they stopped. I mean, he could have continued with other journalists. He could have continued doing it with Schellenberger. He could have continued doing it with Paul Thacker, or other journalists. And so this sudden, I'm so mad about this that we're going to shut this whole thing down. It had the odor to me of some other kind of motivation in the background. I don't think it was an accident that Linda Yaccarino came on board afterwards, and in an effort to try to maybe reverse some of the advertiser boycotts that were going on. I'm sure he was taking all kinds of heat, for stuff that was coming out in the Twitter files. I know he wasn't thrilled about some of the directions that some of those reports went in. he had a lot of enthusiasm for certain topics that we never really got into. And there were others that, he didn't really ever ask us to get into that we got into. And, he may have gotten some phone calls. And in fact, I can almost guarantee that he got some pretty serious phone calls after some of the stuff that we did. And, I understand that. That's why we all had this meeting early on in the Twitter files. And one of the first things we all came to the conclusion was that this is temporary. Whatever this is, it's not going to go on for a long time. Yeah. I don't know what the end game this is, but it's not going to last forever. So let's just get as much shit as we can, and keep this rolling as long as we can, as through whatever means we can. Which I think was, looking back, it would have been nice to extend it a little bit longer, because I think there was some other stuff we could have found out, but there's more stuff. There are more leaks. The problem is how many people are going to see those leaks. That's the issue.
Right.
See that with Julian Assange, right? That was the beginning of the strategy of how to deal with all this. And he was the first person that they whipped out the cutting off banking services with, and it's a little terrifying to see that where the end game was with him. But leaks are not to be countenanced apparently in this new system.
Well, and that's, a lot of this, when Elon first took over Twitter, and we took some shit from some of our audience for this, but then there are, you have all your Elon stands too. But what, you trust Elon Musk? And we always said, no, we wouldn't piss on Elon if he was on fire. But you've got a system that's so corrupt that you're forced to choose between billionaires. You're forced to choose, do you prefer Dorsey or do you prefer Elon? And really, it's we have an oligarchy. It's like the Venetian Republic, where you have democracy among an aristocracy, and the great debates are happening between them. So you have this Musk Thiel faction that's nominally pro free speech. They're better than the other billionaires, right? And they're having this fight, and the peasants here are forced to choose between which aristocrats they want to champion, or which they want to support, or which they want to align with. And that's what I see with Elon. I do not understand working people who run around worshiping a billionaire. I don't care what billionaire it is. I don't get it.
No, I look, people made a great hay of the fact, oh, you're carrying water for a billionaire.
Right.
Information comes from who else is going to have that information.
Right.
And
that's your job as a journalist, to make that kind of a value judgment about where your information comes from.
Yeah, and I went through this a lot with the financial services industry. Especially in the beginning, I had a lot of sources who were very wealthy, like hedge fund types, who their basic complaint was these big banks, Goldman and Chase and Bank of America, they've essentially fused with the government, and what they're doing isn't capitalism, and that way they're not fighting fair with people like us, and therefore I'm going to tell you like 9 things about them that really suck. And okay, maybe this guy might not be my friend in the normal parlance, right? He might even be a private equity person whose entire reason for living is to eliminate jobs. But in that moment, you're getting information about an even more powerful actor. Those are the calculations you make. That's the kind of thing that happens. In the moment, Elon has a streak of independence. He doesn't like to be told or dictated to. And what's interesting about that is that this whole informational thing, it's a cartel, and it doesn't work if everybody isn't involved. Right. And so that's why he's under such an intense attack. And again, I would love to be highlighting that aspect of it, but he makes it tough. sure he does.
Also, so while we're on that, let me get your take on this, because the last couple of weeks, this was quite an exercise in Elon's Queen of Hearts management style, as I would call it. So he seems to co-sign a tweet that many people would read as anti-Semitic. He immediately after that goes ahead and bans the phrase "from the river to the sea" from X as eliminationist. Media Matters drops this story that he's now suing for, probably with some justification.
Definitely some, I think. Yeah.
Yes, where they claim that ads were appearing with neo-Nazi content, something that Schellenberger tried to reproduce in the lab and was not able to get the same results. So he's suing for that. He goes and gives a tongue bath to Netanyahu, seemingly in order to get back the advertisers that have left under pressure from Media Matters. And then he immediately comes back and tells all the advertisers to go fuck themselves.
Which, that moment was great. I love that.
So what do you make of this? Because why would you go give Netanyahu a tongue back? Like, why would you degrade yourself that way?
Right.
And then come back and pull that move.
And then
what
give it all
was
away.
That?
Right. Give it all
Why?
back. Yeah.
If you read the Isaacson biography, he suggests in a couple of places that Elon has multiple personality disorder. And it's funny, not until I read that did I think, yeah, you know what? Maybe, right? Because like I didn't see him a whole lot, but I definitely had exchanges with him where it's like his whole affect just changed completely. Like in the last 30 minutes, we just had a discussion where he didn't remember the contents of a conversation we had 90 minutes ago. He's an impossible read. He would be very difficult to play poker with. In our initial meeting about the Twitter files, I was really nervous because you're always trying to read what's the motive, like why does a person want to do this. Now I got a very strong sense that he was doing this because he was fucking pissed about something and wanted to just shove this up somebody's ass, and I got the feeling that it was the right people. So
Right.
then I felt that was satisfying enough to your spider sense that we'll do that story. But I never really got a full read about what was going on in his head because it seemed to change so constantly. You see that mercurial is an understatement with that guy. Like he's just all over the map, and he'll say one thing and then 10 seconds later it will be the exact opposite. So I have no idea like what he was thinking. If he would just be frozen in that go fuck yourself moment, he'd be like a hero to mankind.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it's the kowtowing and the cruelty and the the shamelessness that's mixed in between, like I just don't understand the rest of that picture.
Well, that's always
so
how
basically,
Go ahead.
so Elon is the Green Goblin, you're saying?
Yeah, he's a little bit, right? Yeah, like the Willem Dafoe thing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe that's what's going on, is that he's drinking the green enhancement fluid at night. But look, I'm sure he's got some very interesting, sort of pharmaceutical, suppliers, but that can't be the entire explanation. He's a unique character. A lot of these people who are billionaires, they get to be, because they have they don't have to be grounded in reality like other people.
Right. Yeah, they have people who will say yes along the way, who will very much sort of like accommodate these whims. Like I never dealt with billionaires to my knowledge, but Russell and I are both New York City tour guides. Russell still is. The richest clients were always the craziest ones, always the most impulsive ones. They never paid attention. There was this one couple, not to get sidetracked, but they hired me out to drive them around in private. And they were very, very nice to me. They paid me very well. They had their own driver, and I just sat in the passenger seat, and I directed the driver. and they said they were from Sacramento. They say, we want the best New York pizza slice. Where do we get the best New York pizza slice? I said, well, the best slice in Manhattan, I think, for my money, is the Bleecker Street Pizza Nona slice. I don't know if you see Matt's
Matt knows.
Well, I like John's too, but
But that's a sit-down pie place, like the New York, the Nona at Bleecker Street is like a great grab-and-go Tuscan style slice. So I said that's where I kind of want to take you because it's right in the middle of the village. We can do some cool sightseeing around there. Literally 2 minutes later, the guy's wife, we're going up 6th Avenue, and there's that Grimaldi's sort of kiosk restaurant in that church. You know what I'm talking about, right? And
that used to be the Limelight.
Yeah, exactly. And the guy's wife says, oh, Grimaldi's, I heard that's the best pizza in New York. Why don't we go there? And I tell her, and I had never eaten a Grimaldi slice. I mean, it's fine. I guess I had it that day. I said, well, I tried to be polite. I said, well, as I just said a few minutes ago, I want to take you to this other place that I think you'll like a little better, right? She says, okay, great. Jorge, whatever the driver's name, pull over. We're going here. As if I wasn't fucking talking to her. We go into the restaurant, we sit down, and the husband says, Keaton here, our tour guide, said this is the best pizza in New York. I've never fucking been here before. I've not said any of this. Zero. But they were very wealthy. They obviously had no one in their lives who had any reason to actually push back on anything they say. So they just make up reality as they go along. That's a personality type. Now, Elon may have some unique things going on, but that's a type. I recognize that type. And it's a tech bro type too. Move fast, break things. That was the ethos at Facebook, right? Just all impulse, all ego. Don't think anything through. Make it up as you go along. Take a lot of chances. We'll work it out as we go. And some people are very successful at that.
Yeah. It's grandiosity, narcissistic personality disorder. We're like, that's all familiar. Like most of us have, dealt with the great Santini type somewhere along our lives. That you don't have to have $1 billion to be that.
Right.
But what they add to it is they can be very creative in their particular kind of lunacy. I mean,
right.
In addition to being, having a personality disorder that freezes out other opinions, has no tolerance for giving other people credit for things or, whatever. They might actually think that, if they spend enough money, they'll on some project that they can develop something that will keep them alive forever, or that they'll be able to go, faster than light speed and remain in perpetual motion and never die. Like they have thoughts like this, right? That are not like ours. That was something that I didn't know until I started hanging around these tech folks. Some of the fantasies they have are pretty weird, but just their way of dealing with people. It's not just your traditional Wall Street dickhead thing. It's coded in this kind of like California nice thing.
100%. Yep.
Right, but it's phony. I actually prefer the Gordon Gekko type who just tells you "fuck you" to your face and is straight with you. That's just much easier to read who that person is. Now when they get, when money is on the line, that's when they get clever. But the people in this tech world, that's part of what's been so interesting about this project is that once you get past the personalities and ignore, if you can get into the documents and ignore what they're saying, that you can actually see what they're doing, and what they're doing is just fucking horrifying. But you're right, it's a personality type. It's just in their case, it's a little more eccentric.
Yeah.
Well, whenever I'm dealing with people like that, I understand Raymond Chandler's novels better.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, exactly.
It's always about you got invited to the house of these rich weirdos,
right? And
you're gonna delve into their dirty laundry and find out what they're really like.
Right. Yeah, they're in a hothouse surrounded by the world's
orchids.
Yeah, exactly. And your sweat stains your. That's a great scene. Big in the big sleep.
The Big Sleep. That's the
Yeah.
opening scene.
Yep.
Bogart did a great job with that one. But yeah, no, and that hasn't changed. But I think what's different is that these people, there's an eccentricity. I mean, there's this quasi-religious thing that's going on that I don't fully understand. That I heard reference to a few times. There's a kind of mysticism involved. I never really, because it wasn't relevant necessarily to what we were working on, I didn't pay a lot of attention to, but I heard some of this shit. They're just weird, but Elon is a special kind of weird on top of that. That's all I'll say.
Did you ever see Oliver Stone did a miniseries years ago that I often think of when a lot of this stuff comes up? It was called Wild Palms.
No, what was it about?
Okay, so it was really more and more ahead of its time the more I think about it. For one thing, it's set in LA, and it's all these rich weirdos in LA, and they have a religion that's clearly kind of inspired by Scientology. But
Right.
the thing that always comes back to me is people had become so inoculated to the idea that the police state just comes and grabs people that they don't even pay attention. So you'd have these scenes of people walking their poodles through palm trees, and you just have a black van pull up and grab somebody and throw them in, and nobody would really bat an eye at it. It almost seems like that's where we're going.
Probably, right? I mean, I'm sure you've read the Gulag Archipelago books, right?
Yeah.
Solzhenitsyn, if I remember correctly, he tells a story about how the NKVD, or whatever they were before that, the Cheka, I think it was.
The Cheka, yeah.
They would try all these different ways to grab people, like they hadn't perfected, or they thought it was important to have lots of different ways so that you would be afraid all the time. Right. So they would come at your door at night. They would knock. Sometimes they wouldn't knock. And then sometimes they would just come at you from all angles in the middle of the street, and so that people could see that it could happen to you anywhere. Apparently, one woman was walking along the Arbat, which is like the South Street seaport of Moscow, basically, and they tried to arrest her, and she just jumped on a light pole and grabbed hold of it and started screaming, and they got freaked out and didn't arrest her, and she never got arrested. So it was a little quirk in the system, but yeah, we're probably headed towards something like that.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, we're just past like the 1-year anniversary of the Twitter files, and volume 1 of the Twitter files, the subject of that was, of course, the Hunter Biden laptop, and that came up again at the hearings. Dan Goldman apparently going down with the ship on that Hunter Biden laptop. Let's take a look at this, another piece of video I have.
Look at that segue. You can't teach that, man. You cannot teach that. That's skill.
Yeah, no, it'd be great if you didn't step on it, so when I clip it, I wouldn't have to do it over. But thank you for the compliment. All right, let's go to Dan Goldman talking about the Hunter Biden laptop.
You are aware, of course, that the laptop, so to speak, that was published in the New York Post was actually a hard drive that the New York Post admitted here was not authenticated as real. It was not the laptop the FBI had. You're aware of that, right?
It was the same contents.
How do you know?
Because it's the same. I mean,
you would have to authenticate it to know it was the same contents. You have no idea. You know hard drives can be manipulated.
Are you suggesting the New York Post could participate in a conspiracy to construct the contents of the Hunter Biden laptop?
No, sir. The problem is that hard drives can be manipulated by Rudy Giuliani or Russia.
But what's the evidence that happened?
Rudy Giuliani can barely manipulate his zipper fly. He's going to manipulate a fucking hard drive on a laptop?
That's what I should have said. Yeah. but he got it anyway here. Yeah.
Rudy Giuliani is going to manipulate a hard drive. He knows how to create a copy of a hard drive. Unbelievable. All right, let's keep going.
Of it, but the point is, it's
There's
not
no
the
evidence for
same
it,
thing.
so you're engaging in a conspiracy
I'm glad
theory.
you agree with me, Mr. Schellenberger, that transparency is the most important thing. And my last question for you is, do you think it would
Right,
be
like that's just a non
transparent
sequitur,
if Hunter-
the way that he did it. Yeah.
He did it backwards.
Right. Right. Let me back that up a second just so we get that again.
Are you telling me trust fund Levi's heirs are not the best and the brightest?
Yeah, right.
So you're engaging in a conspiracy
I'm glad
theory.
you agree with me, Mr. Schellenberger, that transparency is the most important thing. And my
What'd you say?
last question for you.
So when he does that, when he does the "I'm glad you agree with me," this moment of panic flashes across his face as he realizes he forgot the setup.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like that made no sense to me when I was watching that. And this clip went so viral, and I'm watching it and I'm thinking, wait a minute, what, did they edit something out? Like what, like that makes, yeah, there was just a complete leap, complete jump. All right, let's keep going.
Do you think it would be transparent if Hunter Biden came to this Congress and testified in a public hearing, and more transparent than if he testified privately?
I mean, literally, I've never thought about that. I have no idea.
You don't
I've
know?
literally never thought about that.
Public testimony more
I mean, this is
transparent than
random
private testimony?
hour here. Are you familiar with the First
Mr.
Amendment?
Chairman, I
It
yield
says that
back.
the Congress shall take no action to abridge freedom of speech.
Yeah,
And that's what you just described.
Mr. Schellenberger, is 13% censorship still censorship?
Absolutely.
And the other 87% is what we call the chilling effect that the courts have long recognized that they engaged in. That is the problem.
There's a broad by the way, part of the operation, Congressman
Holy
Goldman,
cow.
part of the operation was to change the terms of service. So you see them constantly trying to change the terms of service. You see them, it was 35% of the URLs that were, this is according to EIP, were labeled, removed, or soft blocked. That's all forms of censorship. That censorship is not just removal.
But 65% were not. So how can the government be so coercive?
Does the First
What?
Amendment
I
say
think
that
that's
the
about par
government
for the
can
course
only-
on government
does the First
efficiency?
Amendment say the
This
government
is how
can censor?
stupid. This is how stupid the rich liberals of Lower Manhattan are, that they voted for this idiot because he held Trump accountable during the impeachment. Held him accountable for what? The guy, Trump got away with everything during the impeachment. I mean, look.
He's on the verge of getting reelected.
Yeah, and he's going to get reelected. Right, exactly. In a landslide next year. I mean, look, I'm not a Democrat. I wash my hands of this. But as Democrats go, they had Yulee New, they had Mondaire Jones. Even Bill de Blasio was in the race for a while. He'd have been better. This guy is an absolute clown. Just a ridiculous person. Just a totally fucking ridiculous person. 65% of the request. What the hell are you? 60? That means 35%. You made that point, I think, Matt, because you can kind of hear you in the background at the end of this. But do you want to add anything before we play the rest?
Well, it's just in the entire universe of things that you could bring up.
Right.
Right.
Question. The thing you have to bring up is the proof that they censor in 35% of cases.
Right.
Like, that's just leading with your face in a boxing match. I mean, this guy's a lawyer. Like, what lawyer introduces that? I don't know. It was amazing. And so, we were trying to get on his case, and I yelled out something about it being, we have 35% of a First Amendment, but Michael made the same point. And,
Yeah, here, I'll play the rest because I hear your voice at the end of this.
Time of the gentleman has
They're
expired.
not censoring. They're flagging in the social media companies.
recognizes
Under
the
coercion.
35% of a First
Chair-
Amendment, or
Chair
It's not the First Amendment. It's the terms of service, as you said, and they are
Oh, my.
flagging it for the social media companies to make their own decisions. That is not the First Amendment. That is the terms of service.
Just
I
seen
mean,
Congressman,
that
you're an
is
attorney, you know
just
that the
almost
4 federal
too
judges-
absurd to respond to.
I know, and again, and I made the point to him. It's like 4 federal judges have already said that it's that is censorship, and he knows very well what all the cases are. I'm assuming.
I'm sorry, I have that. Sorry,
Yeah.
I cut that off too soon. Hold
But it's on
I have
appeal
that
in
part
front of the Supreme Court.
There we go. Yeah.
Just seen the
Congressman, you're an attorney. You know that 4 federal judges have already ruled that.
And I know that it's on appeal in front of the Supreme Court right now.
Yeah, where it's certainly going to win, right? like what?
Well,
I mean,
sadly, it may not, but still, I mean, it's very amusing to see a Democrat put all of his trust in this Supreme
no,
Court.
well, that's what I mean. That's
Yeah.
what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and to go like Schultz and Plaskett they had enough with the last one. They got laughed at too much. They left you alone. So he decides he's gonna be the hero. He's gonna go for you guys, and he picks the very well litigated Hunter Biden laptop, arguing that it might be fake or tampered with. Like even the Post had to admit that it was real.
Post, the New York Times, fucking Politico. I mean, there was
everybody
a lot about it. Glenn did some of it. I mean, but even the most mainstream organizations have already said, we made the calls. We found the other people on the end of these emails. Like this is real. And for him to he actually says you would have to verify that. Like it's been done. It's been verified.
Right. What is he talking about?
Right.
So like one line after the other is like false, like 100%. If it was a copy for a news story, you'd have to like strike through the entire thing. You'd have like, Mr. Schellenberger and then thank you at the end. That's what would be left, But he fucked up every single line there. We actually, I don't know if I talked to Schellenberger about this, but I have been trying to needle him, like over and over again, because I've always had the sense that he's dumb enough to say something like revealing. So occasionally I'll try to tweet at him and give him a hard time. I think he just takes this shit personally. I've actually heard in private that he's a nice guy, so that's kind of surprising. But he comes off as a total doofus, as you see. So,
yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah,
amazing stuff. I think we got a couple more things. If you have time, I don't want to keep you all night.
Yeah, sure, we're good. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Go ahead.
So the aforementioned Missouri versus Biden. All right, so most of our folks probably know, but in case you don't, this is the case that was brought by the attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana against the Biden administration for allegedly, we'll use that word, violating the First Amendment and its contacts with tech companies like Twitter. It could determine the future of speech online, the future of sites like yours, shows like ours. After the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down 6 of the 7 injunctions put in place by a district court judge, the administration still decided to take the case to the Supreme Court, which you decided, as a nerd, I appreciated the reference, the Borg making a mistake. So what did you mean? How did the Borg make a mistake by taking this to SCOTUS instead of just letting sleeping dogs lie?
Well, the thing is that even if there is an injunction by a district court saying nobody can talk to these people for any reason, the appellate court cut out the broadness of that ruling and limited it basically to saying you have to follow the law, which they were already violating. So if they were being smart, they could have just said, oh gosh, yeah, well, we're sorry, we'll stop doing that, and just continue doing the same shit. There's no enforcement mechanism in there. Like those judges aren't going to demand it's not that kind of settlement, right? Where they would have had to report, on a regular basis. So, but the plaintiffs' lawyers thought after the appellate court ruled that way that they would not be able to politically allow a judgment that said that the Biden administration violated the First Amendment to stand, and they were right. Where I screwed up is I assumed that if it went up to the Supreme Court, that it was going to win. Now I hear that actually there's a very real possibility that it could lose up there, and that they may even need one of the liberal judges to defect in order to get it, because, well, for a variety of reasons, but among other things, because I mean, how many serious rulings against the Department of Defense have you seen from that court? Like, not many. Some of the judges apparently are very shaky on this issue. So I thought they screwed up by sending it to the Supreme Court, but maybe they didn't.
See, I would have thought the same thing, that this court is definitely going to rule against them. But you're saying that's a much dicier proposition than at first glance.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking to, there are a lot, obviously the plaintiffs, lawyers, there's a lot of people are involved in this case. There's a lot of eyes in this thing. I might be contributing to an amicus brief about it. We've talked to a bunch of lawyers. Some lawyers have thought about joining on to an amicus brief and decided not to because, among other things, because they weren't sure that it was going to win. So, yeah, I don't know a whole lot about how the Supreme Court works. I mean, there's the whole criminological aspect to this that, I've never had to cover anything involving them, but apparently it's not a sure thing. And
there's also a ticking clock, right? I mean, that's the other part. Like, they would want to get this settled before the election, right? Because, I mean, if the Biden administration were going to lean on social media companies to censor content they don't like, they'd want to do it before November of next year, not after. So the timeline is a factor, too. I don't know how that works, when they're going to rule.
Yeah, but even if there's a brutal ruling saying, like, you can't have you can't do all these things, there's still no enforcement mechanism. You have to remember they were already
Right, that's true.
Violating the law. And even if the Supreme Court says the Department of Homeland Security can't get involved in domestic electoral issues, or call that cybersecurity or whatever, who's going to say that you need another executive branch agency to enforce that? And the problem is the whole executive branch is in on this. So,
right. That's
Right.
true. That's the other thing, yeah. And even if they did enforce it, then the ticking clock becomes an issue again, because by the time you get through appealing that and, okay, now that we went through this process of setting the rules, then somebody breaks the rules, even if there is somebody who's willing to blow the whistle on it, which is doubtful. At that point, you have to see whether or not they actually did break the rules. At that point, we're well past November of next year, right? Like, they'll be able to just push this past the election either way.
Right. The one good piece of news is that, from what I understand, there is no election integrity partnership type thing in the works right now. They had a second one. They had a smaller scale version for 2022, but there's nothing that I know of for 2024 set up. But as we saw, they can do these things pretty quickly. So I mean, the last one, the one in 2020, that the idea for it was in April, and they had it up and running by August. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people have very high hopes for that case. I'm very glad that it's the plaintiffs, Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff and Eric Haryadi, they're the perfect plaintiffs because, not only, do they have a very, is there a lot of documentary evidence in their cases, but they turned out to be right. And that's going to be a hard thing for judges to look past if it ever gets to that.
Right,
Russell, did you get your your CLIT question in, or did you want to do that one?
I do want to do that one. All right. So in conjunction with Public last week, you broke the story of Cyber Threat Intelligence League, otherwise known as CLIT. This is what you had to say about them. He said, I don't favor censorship, but if I did, I'd want to be sure the people doing it did not all come from the same economic and educational background. That's clearly the case with CLIT and others like it. These folks come from the same schools and tax bracket. They vomit out the same prefab Flauberian bourgeois idiocies, inhabit the same informational bubble, and boast the same immunity to proletarian frustrations, read reality. And you also said something similar, although I'm taking this from your article. I think you changed it a little in your statement, but in your written version of your statement for Congress, you said take away the highfalutin talk about countering hate and reducing harm and anti-disinformation is just a bluntly elitist gatekeeping exercise. If you prefer to think in progressive terms, it's class war. So, can you explain what this organization is and why you believe the war on disinformation at this point? I haven't really heard you use this language very much before, but it seems to be a conclusion you're coming to now, that it's really about class.
Well, that's one of the things that happens when you cover something. It takes a long time to see the whole picture sometimes, right?
Sure.
When I did the Wall Street thing, I was probably 2 or 3 years into it before I fully understood the whole scam, of
Right.
mortgage-backed securities. Here, it takes a while to see that. Well, first of all, let's get what is CTI League. CTI League was sort of a precursor to the Election Integrity Partnership or the Reality Project, and it was designed by this very eccentric British woman named Sarah Jane Turp, S.J. Turp. She's a data scientist and former British defense analyst. She worked at a company called an open source company called Ushahidi. Started there in February of 2014. Another person who joined at that exact same time was a person named Jonathan Morgan, who was the CEO of a company called New Knowledge, which was the Senate analyst for the Russian bot report, but they also did that phony deal where they created fake Russians in the Alabama Senate race, and then they were behind Hamilton 68 as well. Right. So there's a weird Hamilton 68 connection with these people. Anyway, she, in conjunction with this defense official named Pablo Brewer, they set up sort of a volunteer review group to look at ostensibly just COVID misinformation. But we had a whistleblower came forward to Michael basically with all the documents from that group. And what we learn is that basically this volunteer private organization was basically created because DOD, DHS, and Global Engagement Center, and even the CIA and NSA can't do it legally. And so you create these kind of quasi-private structures through which the censorship is done. You guys know the basic thing. But the thing that, and this is the punchline, I think, for all the stuff since the Twitter files is, when you get right down to it, all these programs are very similar. They're run by the same group of people. They go back and forth between media, intelligence, and government. But they all went to the same Ivy League schools that we talked about. And the one thing they all have in common is none of them come from hardship, right? There are no ordinary people involved in doing this work, and that's kind of crucial to understand. It's like you have to be credentialed to get into this thing, and it's almost like having a literacy test for voting. Like there's a reason why that was a fucked up idea. Well, this is the same thing. Like you're not going to get to be censoring content unless the EU has very specific language about what kind of, you have to be credentialed to be what they call a trusted flagger. And I did a FOIA request on one of these programs, and even just to do the grunt work of cleaning up the material for the reviewers, you had to have a bachelor's degree. The people who did the actual reading had to have master's degrees. So it's going to be sort of affluent professional class, people all around the world censoring everybody else. And that's kind of the key, I think, to understanding this whole thing. CTI League is important just because additionally, because it gives us a window into this other universe of shit that we didn't see in the Twitter files, which is the offensive stuff, where they fake news stories and invent things and create sock puppet accounts and stuff like that. We're going to probably learn that they do that a lot more than we thought, but that's coming still. So,
Well, one of the things that really struck me in your article, because you guys got a lot of footage of them and audio of them talking. What often strikes me about people with these credentials and these degrees is that fundamentally they're dumb as dog shit and as boring as milk. They're just the flattest, most uninteresting people, and you really get the sense that they cling so tightly to mores because they have nothing interesting to say. They would have nothing to say if they weren't spouting platitudes and gatekeeping and telling other people what to do. Like what do they have to recommend them? How could they possibly gain any power other than to suck onto social values and appoint themselves to enforce them? Why would anyone pay attention to them?
I mean, there's a woman in one of the videos named Deb Lavoie who was part of this thing called the Reality Team, and she says things like, "Yeah, I don't know a whole lot, but I know about narratives."
Yeah,
and then they have no problem editing or reviewing people who have PhDs in biological sciences, even though they don't know anything themselves. And then they come out and say things like, well, we're going to do the same things that the bad guys do, but we're going to do it for good reasons. So that's when you start getting into creating sock puppet accounts and creating distractions so that people can't read what they deem to be harmful material. And that's why this stuff is so dangerous, because it's not just suppressing true content. They're also going to be kind of fundamentally altering reality in other ways by introducing all kinds of fake stuff into the ether, and we'll have no way of figuring out what it is at a certain point. I mean, right now we're all trying as hard as we can to point it out. I mean, you guys do it, everybody. The whole alternative media is very right now focused on identifying fake stuff and exploiting it, but you can't get everything, and then pretty soon they're going to be able to do this so well that it'll be impossible to detect. That's what's scary about it.
Well, if there's an element of hope, it is how dumb this audio exposes them as. You actually have audio there where they're trying to figure out how you determine if a medical research report is actually wrong, and nobody knows. And they're asking, so how do you are there places you can look to find that out? And the person they turn to as like the expert is like, yeah, there are places you can go, so just look for them.
There are academic paper places. These are the people. I mean, that's what's so fucking terrifying. I mean, and I was saying this to Walter. It's a little like the end of the trial when he gets dragged away for execution, and he sees that it's like these three pot-bellied dumb actors who are taking him away to be executed. Underneath the surface of these highly sophisticated programs are these absolute fucking idiots. And it's a little hard to accept at first, but it's fundamental to understanding this whole thing. I interviewed a lot of the military folks who did the counterterrorism stuff. That they built a lot of these tools. Those people are smart. Like they were out there doing battle with ISIS and Al Qaeda and whatever you might think of them morally. They actually understood, these are smart people, right? Like,
right.
These people are idiots.
These are busybodies.
Right. Yeah. They came from like corporate marketing. They're like, software marketing executives. If you notice in those videos, the one person who doesn't sound like a total idiot is the DoD guy. And that's consistent with what we've seen. But yeah, that's what's terrifying about this is that on the domestic speech suppression front, you're going to see all these people who have no real life experience editing, becoming editors in chief of the universe, and that's the future, which is great,
Well, you had, I think this was my favorite one, and this was kind of the star piece. You have like the ultimate shitlib bitching about her shitlib in-laws.
Oh my God!
For not being informed enough. Like I think if there's any satisfaction here, It's what the release of this material has done to her family dynamics. But she goes on about how her in-laws are liberals, but they only regurgitate what they get from TV, and what they really need is to be programmed by the likes of her,
right,
so that they can better argue their liberal positions and not just be on autopilot.
She even has some kind of quote in there, like, if you can even call it thinking, or like if you can even call it their ideas, if you can even call them. It's something like so fucking insulting.
It's going to be a very awkward Christmas.
Oh yeah, I thought about that. I thought you don't often get a chance to send a cruise missile directly into somebody's family, but look, I would have preferred to interview this person and find out what she's thinking, but they didn't want to talk to us. So, and by the way, that stuff was public anyway. We got it from a whistleblower, but they left it online also. So it's not our fault that it's out there. But yeah, and then by the way, that wasn't the only one. There's another one where she's talking about her son, and about how he thinks everything is bullshit, and he's just a nihilist, and we need to find sort of easier ways to penetrate minds like his and stuff like that. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. These people are very, very affected by their interactions, but with their relatives, which should tell you a lot. Like, you're going to decide the information landscape for the entire world based on how your holiday dinner went. I mean, really? But yeah, people are like that. It's just crazy. And that's why that's by the way, that's one of the reasons why we're getting calls from some of the military folks, is because they're losing their mind seeing this stuff being applied over here. Like, we didn't spend 20 years designing these evil weapons to have them put in the hands of people like this, so. Yeah,
that's a point Chris Hedges always makes, that eventually the things that they do overseas will be used against the population.
Always, yeah. And I guess naively, I didn't expect that would happen, but no, I did. I mean, I at least theoretically, I thought it could, but I never thought it would come back like so directly. And that is the story of this. This is the war on terror come home, and we're just seeing what it looks like. I mean, we haven't. Walter talks a lot about how we haven't had the first domestic droning yet, but it's probably not far off, I would imagine. So, we'll come to that. But yeah, those documents are amazing for sheer humor value. If your listeners haven't checked them out, I would strongly recommend it.
Definitely check those out at Racket. If I might suggest a title for your follow-up, The Banality of Shitlibs.
That's not bad. I like it.
We just got one more little question / segment for you on a slightly different topic, but you wrote a quick piece recently about the economy and how, according to both Joe Biden and Biden supporting pundits, the American people are too stupid to understand how well off they are financially. And you even compared Paul Krugman to Thomas Friedman, and I know your work well enough to know that you did not mean that as a compliment. So do you want to explain what you mean by that, and how this White House and their minions in the press are actually trying to gaslight people into thinking that the economy is actually great?
So the basis of that was a Guardian poll about attitudes, how people themselves felt about the economy. So you're polling people you're not asking them, is inflation going up and down? You're not asking them to correctly identify macroeconomic factors or whatever it is. How do you feel about the economy? Are things good or bad? Right? And the answer comes back, it's bad, right? Like, a lot of people are very anxious about it, and the attitudes are moving in a direction of more heightened concern rather than the other way. And first the Guardian and then Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman has repeatedly told people that they are engaging in falsehoods about their own feelings. And they write this stuff and they don't know how it sounds, right? Like, and this is something that's been true since you both know this, since the Trump years. This has been the theme of coverage of what the great unwashed is like. They don't really have these feelings of anger and frustration. They're just wrong, and they just need to be told that more often. And once they hear it enough times, they'll stop being dissatisfied. I mean, do they really think that's going to work? And the only way you can think that's going to work is if you've never had any interaction ever with people who are really mad in that way. I mean, what do you think about that? I just find that shit amazing. Personally, to read that.
It's stunning. I mean, it's a real head scratcher. I mean, it's the same sort of blindness that we saw in 2016, which is when Trump won the first time. Were it not for the pandemic, I think Trump certainly would have won the second time, and now he's likely going to win the third time. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's just, talk about trying to force a square peg into a round hole. The whole narrative that inflation's gone down. Well, the rate of inflation's gone down. But look, my day job until we started doing well with this show, and I still do it from time to time to supplement, I shop Instacart. I used to spend 8 hours a day in a fucking grocery store. Inflation has not gone down. Maybe the rate has gone down. Shit is still through the roof. I mean, it is just impossible to buy things. You can't fill a grocery bag for less than $80. So I don't know much of the same
bacon,
way
egg,
that
and
the
cheese in
reality-
Harlem, $6.
Yeah, unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Like, much in the same way that the Israel-Gaza war is just too in people's faces to the point where they can't possibly ignore or get the wrong idea about what is actually happening because we see the photos and the videos. You can't gaslight people about the economy in this way because when they go to the store and they fill a bag of groceries, they know how much it costs. And they know that makes it impossible to live. No, I mean, you have to make a ton of money now just to live a working class lifestyle. There is no middle class lifestyle anymore.
No. I mean, anything goes wrong in America, it's $5,000. That's the starting price for something off schedule happening, like getting a dent of your car or whatever it is, right?
My kid's had a health scare. He spent 3 days in the hospital. That bill alone, with insurance through my wife's work, is $2,200. That's not counting the specialist follow-ups that we had to do or the primary care or the Medicaid, this and that. I mean, luckily, thank God he's okay, which is the most important thing. But like you said, something like that happens out of nowhere, boom. Now you got bills out your ass that you're going to be paying off for years.
Right, and they know, and people like Paul Krugman, they know because the Fed puts out this data every 6 months or whatever, that half the country doesn't have $400. Right? $400 extra dollars. So, like, in this environment, it's obvious that there's going to be an enormous amount of dissatisfaction. But on top of that, it's just writing it the way that, or saying it the way that they do. Your feelings about the economy are incorrect, or your frustration is wrong. That's not actual rhetoric. That's not a way to convince people, right? That's just being insulting. It's like, I don't respect your point of view or your perspective. That's what you're really saying. And that just makes people more angry. And that's why you're seeing the snowballing thing where people are going to be like, I'll vote for Donald Trump if he's in jail, and tied to 100 chained to 100 cinder blocks, like just to see the look on your face when he gets elected. That's what people are going to be thinking on election day. Right. If you keep this shit up, and they don't get it, So, but we could go on about this forever. But all of these things are it's a replay of the same error over and over and over again, and it's infuriating to read. Definitely.
Yeah, to bring the talk back to academia, when I was in college, the economic textbook that I was forced to buy for however many hundreds of dollars, guess who wrote that? Paul Krugman. He's a textbook author. Yeah, he's a textbook author. Yeah.
So he's kind of like a guaranteed income scam, right?
Oh yeah, no, that's how he makes his money. Right. Hack teachers force 19-year-olds to buy his books for $300 a piece. Yeah.
Take out loans to do it, probably.
Yeah, take out loans to buy his books to learn about how great they have it. Yeah.
I mean, doesn't that make you just want to walk up to the person and slap him? Like, and that's, I mean, I just feel like these people don't realize how insulting that is, and how much that will motivate people to do just about anything except support you politically. Like when you do that stuff like that, this is unbelievable. Now you got me all up. Shit.
See, and we thought that was like a mellow question.
Yeah, we thought
to bring in the landing on. I think it's a combination of things. I think partly it's what Thomas Frank said. I always show people this great clip he did, an interview with a French magazine about why Trump won. And towards the end of the interview, he says, it's a short clip, about 10 minutes. He says, the Hillary generation cannot admit that they were wrong. They cannot admit that their entire political project was a mistake. They can't.
Right.
So a lot of what you see with someone like Krugman, who's from that generation, it's the sunk cost fallacy. It's we went so far in this direction. The ramifications of admitting that it was all a horrible mistake to our professional reputations, to our lives. Like, what if we were to actually reverse course? What would that mean for me? Because I've made out well in this turn, right? I wouldn't do very well in a more fair society, would I? So they have to defend neoliberalism. And if you're not going to offer the people anything, all you can offer them is scorn at that point for rejecting you.
Thomas Frank, what is it? A nation of scold, or it's like a nation of scolding, or I forget what the term is.
You're talking about one of the columns, right?
Yeah. But that's what it is. It's scolding, right? Like even Krugman's column. It's a scolding column. No, I, the expert, scold you for having the wrong opinion, and you're right. Yeah, like they can't back up. They can't say they're wrong. And Thomas he was one of the first people to see this stuff coming, and isn't it a coincidence that he got exiled from the C2, I mean, it's just, these people are unerring in their instincts for avoiding truth, so yeah, and there's no way back for them, but except for more of these tools of control. And that's why this is, I think, the next part of that story.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely right. All right. Well, you can check out Matt's new Substack, rapeandmurder.substack.com, where you can see exciting new live streams every week. Yeah.
Can I say one last thing?
Sure.
That's why they fund so many zombie movies, because they know, right? Like if they make even one concession or admit even one thing, that's the next step. Is like the whole world is gonna pour in through their doorway and just start eating their faces off, and they're absolutely right about that. So I'm sorry.
I have a different read on the zombie genre.
Really?
I think it became so popular because we hate the civilization we've built so much that the fantasy of returning to tribal circumstances where we're valued for who we are and for our core ethics and decency is so appealing to us, where you're just fighting off predators with people who love you and who have your back, right?
That's like the world where that's like the Walking Dead version, where it's like, we're that's sort of like the Incredible Hulk script, where you're sort of wandering through the wilderness making friends or whatever it is, and you're surrounded by hostiles. Yeah, you're right about that, but I still think there's an upper class terror fantasy underneath a lot of the zombie shit, the vampire thing is the opposite. That's the we're beautiful and we're going to live forever thing. That's like self-congratulatory, but that's another topic for another show.
Yeah.
I hope
we'll have to bring you in on our next annual Halloween episode.
Oh man! Oh god!
Tell people where they can find you before you head out.
Yeah, I'm at Racket.News. Thanks everybody, and my God, we talked for 2.5 hours. My kids are gonna. I'm gonna go face the music upstairs. Thank you, gentlemen.
We appreciate you giving us so much of your time, man.
Have a good show. And congratulations on the success with the show. It's great. So.
Thank you so much, man. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you, Matt.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Please clap.